You're listening to Payments Innovation, a podcast dedicated to helping business leaders navigate today's global digital economy. Looking to learn about the latest innovations within fintech and payments? You've come to the right place. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Payments Innovation Podcast. This is Kara Hayward here, hosting your Fintech Karaoke series, focused on partnerships in the Fintech universe here in North America. I'm very excited to have a special guest with us today, Wade Arnold from Moov. Welcome, Wade.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. So Wade is the CEO and founder of Moov, and I would love for you if you could maybe just do a quick background about yourself, about Moov and what you're building.
Sure, that sounds great. The quick background about myself, I think I've been in fintech since before it was called fintech. So my path into here was I started a company in 2008 called Banno. Banno was a mobile banking and internet services company for community banks. And that was sold to Jack Henry in 2014. I stayed there for 2.5 years and got to work with more than just my product offering there. So that was fun. And the last really 3.5, 4 years, I've been at a company called Bilgo that I was an investor in, did all kinds of different fun roles there. And we were modernizing bill pay and taking that to large financial institutions. And then along the way, I started an open source project called Moov, which was designed to move money and move the industry forward and really open source these like low level payment protocols and things that are not critical differentiators to anybody, but are critical infrastructure to everybody. And the project has just exploded, and so we've kind of taken that from project to product and built a company around it.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's fantastic. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that journey, because we'll talk a little bit more later in the series about the open source movement and why you went that route. But what motivated you to start that project and then eventually turn it into a company? And why now, right? Like why is this the right time to build Moov?
Yeah. So I think the motivation was twofold. Number one, I like to say Moov is the most boring company in all of fintech, in that we're not trying to do anything new. Maybe how we're going about it is new, but depository services are defined by the OCC, right? The NACHA regulations are defined by NACHA. And as long as you're an exciting cat like me and like to read the 650-page PDFs and implement that in code with test coverage, then it's not overly complex, but it's really the motivation was a lot of the pieces in order to build fintech, are in essence locked into, mainframes or kind of legacy core systems, right? And I think those are great products for branch banking. And if I started a branch bank, that's what I would use as well as the bank in the box from the major players in that space. But fintech's different, right? Fintech is vertical slices of pieces of that core, and they really need to be built at web scale. So it's, I don't need the 10,000 features on the branch bank core. I need 10, and I need 10 million of them, right? So it's a totally different cross segment. And that's really the space that we see as most of the innovation is happening. And all of that space is developer first, right? So it's engineers that are really looking for the solution versus, bank CEOs that are looking for something to help them operationally. And that was kind of the motivation. I'm a software engineer from trade and started programming in 3rd grade. And so, Moov makes a heck of a lot of sense to me that you would go to GitHub to solve your problems and not to Ruth Chris in order to have a salesperson sell you something.
I love that. That's a great analogy. Awesome. Yeah. And so this is a bit of I think a controversial question, but everyone likes to talk about it. So fintechs versus banks, right? Okay. So there's two sides, I think, or maybe three sides. One is fintech's a trend. it's gotten way too much money. None of them will be profitable and they're all going to die. And the banks will finally catch up and the banks will win after all. Or banks are dead. They're not innovating. They're never going to, like, the fintechs are going to take over. And I think there is a third camp that thinks that there can be room for both. What do you think about that? Which side, if any, are you on?
Yeah, I think I'm on the all of the above side. And so what I mean by that is if Mark Andreessen is correct in that software is eating the world, right? And if Matt Harris is correct that 8% of software companies do payments and 80% will in 10 years. And that if everything is fintech, then really nothing is fintech, right? So Angela at Andreessen Horowitz likes to say that. So if I use the word fintech today, right, we're really talking about usually direct to consumer, embedded financial. Nobody even knows where the deposits or the payments are going through. I think banking has called that treasury management for a long time, but banking has done that in a one-to-one relationship. So that's the loan officer, commercial loan officer to that business. And where I think fintech is different is in these vertical SaaS companies where the banking relationship got pushed out one layer. And so it's a one-to-one to many in that the fintech company is really the commercial customer at the bank. And then their customers, which could be in the tens of millions, all need those banking services, all need that through a regulated chartered institution. But the bank isn't going out and getting those 10 million consumers, right? That's what fintech's doing. And so I see that accelerating. I think if you've ever used Uber, if you've ever used Airbnb, it's almost this iPhone moment where you can't unsee it, right? You can't go back to the BlackBerry after you've seen the iPhone. You can't be an independent contractor in anything else if you've ever used DoorDash or Uber. And so that's the new world. Everybody else is just trying to catch up. The future is in essence here, and how do we catch up? So I think every vertical SaaS company makes operational efficiencies for those verticals, and payments are just going to be part of that. Stored value, remittance is part of that. Yeah. On the banking side, it turns out to move money in the United States, you do need a charter. And yes, you can say, well, the MTLs and maybe the fintech charter are going to do that. But so far, that's you can't truly do banking services with an MTL, right? That's like saying you're going to a digital bank on a prepaid card. It doesn't exactly work when you really get down to it. And so banks are in this spot where I think they should be embracing fintech. Tons of non-interest income, tons of cheap deposits, which may not matter today, but hopefully someday that's a useful thing again. Yep. And that should be exciting. The deals we're seeing in the big bank space are really big banks acting like fintech. So they're saying, I'm going to consolidate my spend on branch banking, but I'm going to innovate in a new vertical, whether that's servicing elderly, high net worth, millennials to any specific unit in between, and really tacking that. And so when you talk to a bank that's going after a vertical, they look, act, and smell like a fintech, right? And it's really just a difference of, do we do all things for all people? I mean, remember the fun omnichannel buzzword.
Gosh, that seemed like just yesterday.
Like just yesterday, we said omnichannel. So maybe that wasn't the right strategy. Maybe individuals need their own individual needs, and we need to focus in on them and provide tailored solutions for each kind of group of demographics. And so I think it's all of the above. I think fintech continues to expand into all of software. I also see banking, try not to be everything to everybody. Obviously, they need to continue doing that to keep the deposits, to keep the loans at this point, for that is a demographic. But what does the next set of users look like?
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, makes sense. And one interesting thing that so you talked about omnichannel, and one interesting trend that will be really cool to see where this goes is some of these vertical fintech challengers that are now trying to become more of that omnichannel bank to try to expand business lines and drive more revenue, right? And for shareholder value and all of that. And I'm just curious, like, do you think that's the right move, or do you think that maybe the best thing to do is kind of stick with that vertical approach, or do you think that they've actually identified the needs of their vertical, and it just happens to be that they did need to expand a little bit to service those? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think they have a balance sheet problem right now, in that the concentration of deposits and loans is under that omni-channel customer, right? That's what they expect. That's what they call a bank. And so that can't go away. And so how do you compete with, challenger banks that are up and coming and offering unit cost economics that are much lower than omni-channel? The drive up tube costs money. So does the property that it's on. Yep. But the cost of that deposit expects that drive up window. The cost of the deposit at Marcus doesn't. And so I think that's where we're starting to see, hey, we're going to keep on running our bread and butter as efficiently as we possibly can, and then look to other opportunities to decrease that unit economics in order to increase the lending and the deposit ratio. If it costs you $14 a month to hold a deposit in a branch, you can go get some more deposits if it only on the digital channel costs you, $1 a month in order to keep that account open.
Yeah, great. So let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about your open source model at Moov, because it's very unique and very interesting. So first of all, why did you decide to go open source for Moov, the Moov project? And just want to hear kind of your thought process around that.
I'll give you a bunch of reasons. Number one, as a developer, Moov's built for developers, and developers choose open source first or open first because they need not only the code, and more people use the code than contribute to the code.
Always,
right? But they want the transparency, right? So, the fact that we're in an industry that open, honest, and transparent is a competitive differentiator tells you a little bit about the industry we serve. But really, it's about how do we also thrive in a community, right? So payments is different in that when things fail, it's bad. It's you don't get to restart the Windows web server. Payroll didn't go through, right? The wire didn't go through. And a lot of times that can be because somebody submitted a file that didn't have the right carriage return, that you don't even know exists in a right? They used a Windows machine or Microsoft Word, and they submitted a credit report in that, and it turns out that blows up, right? So all these edge cases, I think the open community, it's kind of the rising tide lifts all boats. Every single person out there that contributes just a little bit to it, everybody gets the benefit of that low level protocol. And I think that, we may be disrupting the people selling the .NET library for $40,000 a year or whatever, but we're not disrupting, that higher level of the entire payment orchestration and process flow and all the pieces that come through that. And so the more exciting thing is watching people use it for different use cases, right? Watching top 4 banks run years of ACH transactions through our library so that they can take that flat file, generate JSON, and then load it into their machine learning models for fraud to provide better services for customers. So they get the benefit that they didn't have to write that code, or they didn't have to send it to a mainframe. We get the benefit that, $4.5 trillion worth of ACH transactions flew through our library, now have test cases, now have that hardened piece that I would argue there's not very many ACH libraries on earth, that have that level of fidelity. And that's the power to me of open source is the community, joining in order to fix these kind of low level issues and not have to deal on Friday with production outages because they didn't know one little edge case that blocked the entire file from going to the Federal Reserve or going to a credit bureau or going to the IRS.
Yep, that's fantastic. So I think one big question that comes out of an open source model is how is Moov going to make money? Like, what's your business model if everything is kind of open to everyone?
Yeah, so I think that's a fair question. I would say, first off, if I put all of our source code from Bilgo or Bano on GitHub, good luck. So I think there is some amount of expertise that's always necessary. And but in general, we've open sourced these low level protocols, and we'll continue to do that, right? So the one we just did is ISO 20022. Okay, so that is a low level protocol. It happens to be used in the clearinghouse. It happens to be used in Fedwire. It happens to be used in Swift. Happens to be used all over the world. The actual server implementation of Swift is drastically different than the clearinghouse, which is drastically different than how Fedwire utilizes that same protocol. And so I think there's people that benefit from having that low-level protocol out there. There's a lot of people that benefit from having service-level agreements and indemnification and dashboards and APIs and SOC 2s and bank sponsorships. And that's where we see our monetization strategy is, hey, if you want to go build this stuff from scratch and you want to be responsible for social security numbers on your servers and bank account information, and if it doesn't get to the Atlanta Fed at 4:00 at night, you don't care. Have at it. Yeah. Right. But there's a whole lot of other people that think, man, I'd really like to partner with a company that is open first and then delegate a lot of these operational aspects of this to them. And where, Moov's a little bit different is we do have a SaaS solution, but we're also, bank agnostic. So we don't, if you want to use a different bank, have at it. Some of our competitors have packaged that all together. We're portable. So if you want us to run Moov, on premise with your PII data so that it's under your own SOC 2 or in a VPC or with your cloud provider, we can do that for you. And then, the fact that it's open and transparent, we've had customers that are paying us, needed a new feature, they're a development shop, so they add that feature into the open source project. They walk away though after that. So we merge that back in. We have the test cases. The next production release for our hosted solution has that solution that they added in there. But they're no longer worried about what version of Linux is this running, or Go, or database version, or any of those pieces. They just like that feature got added. And we see that happening time and time again. The comps that we're looking at is we don't want to look like, FIS or Fiserv when we grow up, or we wouldn't mind looking like their market cap.
Yeah, of course.
But sorry, that came out of my mouth.
No, I love it. Who doesn't want to look like that market cap, right? I mean,
yeah. But I just mean, business model wise, we'd rather look like, Confluent with Kafka, or Elastic, or MuleSoft, Redis Labs, right? These are all multi-billion-dollar publicly traded companies, and you could argue their source code is, I guess, out there on GitHub. But it's really kind of the only the early adopters that I think we may not be able to capture all the value we create, but they're also giving back. So, I think if you look at our team, which is 11 people, and what we've accomplished, and it was 4 people 2.5 months ago, right? We play a lot bigger than our weight, right? There's a lot of neat things going on, and that's not because of anything other than we have an incredible community that are people like Tyler from Bank Nova or Zach from H.N. Bradley that are brilliant, and they're contributing back to the project for the greater success of all.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And I think one thing for the audience to be aware of is the community obviously is the GitHub community, right? And the actual developers providing their code back to the Moov community. But there's also a Slack channel where there's the communication around it too. And so I think that's been a really interesting thing. I know being a member of it myself and seeing the collaboration through the Slack channel as well, it's kind of neat because you're seeing the developer side of it, but now you're really starting to see a lot of the other roles that go into making a fintech successful, starting to collaborate as well through that community, which has been kind of neat. So one question for you about this community though, because obviously there's a lot of, they call it white hats, right? So people who have been positively contributing and really helping build the community in a collaborative and positive way. Is there any risk for like a Trojan horse situation or, because there's a lot of, so the BaaS space is getting to be hot, right? Lots of money going into a lot of the banking as a service platforms. In North America specifically, it's really small, right? There's only a handful of folks doing what you guys are doing. And to be fair, like what you mentioned, it's really hard to do, right? Really hard to build. But do you have any concern around other folks trying to kind of, build off of what you guys have already built and kept open? How do you protect yourselves against that? Or are you really like, it was so hard for me to build in the first place that I'm not so worried about that? Curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, I think if I said I wasn't concerned about it, that would be an arrogant statement. Yeah. The straight good luck. And there's so much money flying into fintech. I have no disillusions that Amazon couldn't jump in there, put a couple $100 million at the project and do that. And which more or less they've done with things like MongoDB and Redis and other open source projects. And so, 2 pieces there. We do keep these low-level building blocks, which are the most critical pieces, open source. But I think there's models like Red Hat where everything's open source, right? And then there's models like GitHub. You've been able to use Git from the command line on your server for forever, right? But it turns out it's a heck of a lot easier to use the website and pay them for a lot of the additional features that they have. Mm-hmm. And so, unlike GitHub, GitHub didn't write Git. In our case, whether that's ACH or Wire or X9, those level building blocks are out there. But kind of all the pretty dashboard and all the workflow pieces, orchestration pieces, helping with reconciliation. I like to say payments is actually more about reconciliation than payments. And all of those pieces, we haven't open sourced because once you open source something, you can't put that genie back in the bottle or the community will kill you. And so, we want to continue those low level protocols, but we are a for-profit business, right? And so those pieces are out there. And then to your other question, kind of the bad actors, I'm maybe more concerned about, Chase leveraging it as a banking as a service provider than some startup. Mm-hmm. And what we see is most of our prospects are large institutions or large fintechs. And so we don't really have, I think there's other people out there that are doing a good job for the 500 startups or tech stars that, need to iterate on an idea quickly. Our prospects are companies you would know. Yeah. And they're looking to differentiate, bring this in-house, kind of have more control over their long-term destiny than a single third-party vendor. And so that being said, we trying to not pick winners and losers.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to pay us, we're willing to help.
Yeah.
And otherwise, we have a great community, and you can get help there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Awesome. So one other question. So shifting focus again, what has been, so I think in the payment space and the fintech space, I think the hardest thing is bridging the gap between a lot of the legacy tech at banks that, as you mentioned, right, you have to have a bank charter to have some sort of fintech, right? Going the MTL route is just impossible nearly in North America. So banks have to be involved no matter what. I know that you guys have done a lot of work to bridge that gap, right? To take some of that legacy type of software and or processes or regulation and build developer-friendly, developer-first, technology on top of that. But I think one thing that is hard, and we talked about this a little bit about this in the community, is tech is one thing, right? But then there's the compliance, right? There's the regulation, there's the operations, there's the business model, and there's so many other things that go into it. And you could have maybe the payment instructions automated, but then you find out, oh man, the transaction monitoring, the bank I'm using, that they don't have a new age service for that. And we have to pass a file to them and it just breaks the whole process. So in your experience in all the work that you've done, what do you think some of the hardest processes were for you to automate and for you to build technology on top of?
So banks love to physically look at things from a risk standpoint. And I think that workflow aspect of it is always the most difficult. And so what's the root cause of that? The root cause is risk, because the person with the charter is on the hook for that payment, right? So I think sometimes consumers can complain about banks, but they don't realize that $140,000 goes out on the wire, it is gone. Yeah. And it takes a lot of nickels to catch up to $140,000. And banks have all other forms of revenue opportunities that normally offset some of that risk. But if you think purely of payment providers, you can't offset that risk in a nickel and ACH, right? Which there's probably listeners that are like, I would never pay a nickel for an ACH. So it's all good until you lose money. Right. And I think that's really, from an automation standpoint, where we spend the most time is, what are those pieces that the back office actually wants to look at? It turns out those are great training sets for machine learning when people actually click on something that they want to review. And so rather than them spending time looking through the list of things they need to review, can we promote those into items that, based on previous reviews, that maybe they should review today? And that's an easy way of double checking duplicate payment amounts, right? Double checking duplicate payments without setting up a rules engine. Machine learning actually does those aspects well. Yeah. I don't know that we're ever going to get to a point where a bank allows you to just blindly submit things to the network, but they definitely are interested in ways of making their operational back office more efficient. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we want to spend the time, not telling them, don't worry, the computers are in control, but use the computers to give them more control and more efficiency for the time that is being wasted scrolling through a list of transactions that are about to leave. Yeah. So we look at it that way. I think one unique differentiator about Moov is we're trying to play for a very long haul. Yep. So there are companies out there that have a API that does everything. Moov does not do that. The API that does everything also has every other legacy provider behind it. And what we've chosen to do is, everything we do create is totally independent with zero dependencies on legacy providers. So, our API, our entitlements, rights, and permissions that are connected to the internet, when you submit a payment, it ends at Fedline. It ends at the network. It's not a modern API on what is it, the lipstick on a pig, right?
Yeah.
It's not,
right.
it's not a modern API on a legacy system. We're a complete stack. And so we don't have all the features that make other people provide it. That's fine.
Yeah.
But it does allow us to have a lot more granularity, a lot more control of what we do well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're, as you said, you're building for the future, I think, where it allows for more future innovation as well, right? As regulations change, as the industry changes, as it will and always does very quickly. It sounds like you'll be set up to handle that, which is fantastic.
Yeah, regulations change. They even, this year they even backdated changes in regulations, which helps to have an inventing system that you can go replay history in order to bring fees and interest forward. So,
I guess as we kind of wrap up here, what's next, right? So, I mean, you have a ton of insight into the industry. Couple questions around like trends that you're seeing. What you think the industry should do in the future? So I think first off, talking about like your prospects, your prospects, right? So the fintechs that are out there. What do you think are the next sort of vertical fintechs that will see success or see adoption? I know, for example, there's been a lot of talk about servicing the SMB market better. What do you see there?
Yeah, so I'll Wade Arnold comment, not Wade Arnold, CEO of Moov comment. So what I continue to see is people wanting to do stored value and payments to be more efficient. Right. Mm-hmm. So the last decade was horizontal SaaS companies, and with Salesforce and Bill and a bunch of great examples there. Probably the next decade is vertical SaaS companies that really hone in on an industry, whether that's, law offices or HOAs or home builders or realtors to all of these companies or all these industries move tons of money and need that money integrated into the digital workflow, not going around it in a check, which is still the most common payment vehicle in B2B.
Isn't it amazing?
Amazing, right? And so no reconciliation, and so if you look at what Shopify and others have done in e-commerce, I would expect a similar outcome of that vertically integrated solution in every industry that we serve.
That's great. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think where workflows have been built out for these vertical industries, payments were never a piece of it, so it's completely disjointed. So I think that does really truly provide a good example of what is embedded finance and what are embedded payments, and that's a great example of that. And what about regulation? So I know that we've seen what happened in Europe over the past, decade or so around open banking. I know there's a lot of talk about this, so it's definitely a subject that we hear a lot about. But I'm just curious about your unique perspective. Do you think that we can continue to innovate and do what we're doing in the current regulatory environment, or do you think there are specific certain changes that really need to happen to proliferate the industry?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see. I think there should be regulation around consumer access to data. I don't know that, I don't know. I don't want there to be regulation on technologies mandated to access that data. Mm-hmm. So with, over 17,000 financial institutions, Jack Henry has five different core banking systems, right? The others, have 10 or more. Yeah. There's a reason there's 5. Yeah. They do different things. Yeah. And I think there's a false narrative that you can have a standardized API, which, if you're not a banker, I guess a loan's a loan. But it turns out there's a lot of different types of loans and a lot of different types of deposit solutions. And so what I would rather see is this cat and mouse game on web scrapers, but I would love to see at least the ability to have access to that data in a read-only way. Mm-hmm. And that is in banking, but, what do we do with our banking data? We pay bills. Yeah. So I would also like access to my mortgage information, my credit card information, my utility information. The list goes on those items that my money is being spent on. Mm-hmm. And that to me is the access to the data is where we'll actually get great automated financial management. Most PFM today is still designed around a regression analysis, or we're looking at a string. The length of the string in internet banking was designed so that it could print on an A9 IBM printer.
No way. Seriously?
Yeah. And so rather than going and getting the data from ACH or from Wire or from the credit card swipe or from the debit card swipe, we concatenate what we may deem important so it can print on a statement or into a PDF. And now we have an entire, multi-billion-dollar companies that then take this crap string of data and decide what category that's in, or all kinds of stuff. And really, if we just got rid of the crap piece of data and went back to the source of truth, this would be a much easier process. And so hopefully, I would love to know my utility bill coming up, exactly how much that's going to be, not in a PDF that I need to OCR.
Yeah.
I'd like to know that, not in, great companies, Plaid, MX, GZO, others that figured out ways of guessing what that future bill would be, but actually tell me through an API. And I think if people want a unified API for all the banks and all the billing companies, we're America. Somebody will make that unified API. We just need the right to the data in order to do it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great insight. Anything else you want to share with our listeners? This has been fantastic. Really appreciate it. Anything else on your mind? Anything else you're seeing that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I'll do a sales pitch.
Yeah, sure.
Slack.moov.io.
Yeah.
It's over 700 individuals that are in the industry that I would say more than half don't use anything from Moov, but there are open and transparent, sharing information, very inclusive community, and people are asking all kinds of great questions in order to really deal with those kind of low-level problems that they deal with in their day-to-day operational needs. And so encourage any of your listeners to join that, and I think they'll get a lot of value out of being a part of the community.
Agreed. And as we mentioned, it's open source, it's free to join, and you don't have to be a developer to join the Slack community. I am obviously not a tech person, but I found a lot of value. And, I think the collaboration across all the different, the roles that are really amazing to see. And if not for anything else, you can see lots of amazing pictures of delicious food, as well as really cute pets in a few of the fun channels too. So, well, thank you, Wade. This has been absolutely fantastic. Love your insights as always. Really appreciate you joining, and looking forward to continue to see what you build.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Kara.
Currency Cloud is an online payments company that makes international money transfers fast and simple for businesses. We're building a borderless future where international transactions are seamless for a better user experience. Discover the world's most trusted payment platform and our toolkit of developer-friendly APIs at currencycloud.com.
You've been listening to the Payments Innovation Podcast. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe now in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thanks for listening. Until next time.